you're going to go with me to DeLand. You're into cars, and this will be fun. And if I get shot, you will too. The Edsel Ford Speedster. It was a car designed by E.T. Bob Gregory, who was head of design at Ford Motor Company, for Edsel Ford as his personal sports car. It looks very Bugatti-ish. It was built at the Tri-Motor plant where they build the Tri-Motor airplanes. And at that time, Ford was playing with making airplanes and playing with getting out of the airplane business. So he had a lot of craftsmen around there. And the car was literally built like an airplane. It had a tubed chassis with aluminum stretched over it. And everywhere aluminum met steel, they put webbing in to keep, cathodic corrosion down. All the rivets, the body was riveted on the chassis and on the side pods, and all the rivets were flush like an airplane. The firewall was engine turned, the dashboard engine turned. It was quite the car for 1934. It would be like seeing a LaFerrari on the streets. It'd stop traffic. Old man Henry Ford didn't like it. He thought it was a frivolous thing. Henry Ford made Edsel pay for all his cars. You could be head of Ford Motor Company, but the old man said, you're going to buy your cars. So it cost him $100,000 in 1934 to build this car. He died in 1943. The estate sold the car. It went to California, and it was advertised for sale in the third issue of Road and Track for $3,200, which at that time would buy you a Lincoln. And the car was at Coachcraft, the famous fabrication shop on Melrose in Los Angeles. And the actor Keenan Wynn used to go over and work between movie stints at Coachcraft. And it is thought that he had an involvement with that car. Whether he owned it or not, we don't know. It may have belonged to Don Lee, who owned a bunch of television stations in Los Angeles and was the Cadillac distributor for California. We don't know who owned it then, but that's what we surmise. We do know it went to Coachcraft. Then it disappeared for a long time, and a guy named Alexander bought it, and it was here in Atlanta, Georgia. Then it ended up on a used car lot in Panama City, Florida. And the guy I bought it from paid $900 for it in 1959. And no one knew what it was, because it didn't have any brands on it. It didn't have a Ford label or anything. It was just this hot rod-looking car. I had heard the car was somewhere around DeLand, Florida. I didn't know who owned it. So I was judging at the Meadowbrook Concours d'Elegance with the writer Michael Lamb. I said, you wrote a story on that car for Special Interest Automobile magazine. Do you remember who owned it? He says, yeah, a guy named Palash. I said, well, that's an unusual name. So I flew to Jacksonville. I got on my computer and I Googled for a Palash in DeLand, Florida. Name came up, and then I called and I said, a gentleman answered the phone. I said, I'd like to speak with Earl Palash. He's dead. Okay, well, let's start over again. I'm looking for someone who knows something about a Ford Speedster. That's me. I said, okay. That car hadn't been seen in 40 or 50 years. My name's Bill Warner. I run the Amelia Island show. Would you be willing to bring the car and show it at Amelia Island? He says, I want to show it. I want to sell it. I said, I'll be there in an hour. It's about 92 miles from my door to his door in Orange City, Florida, which was a little town next from DeLand. We struck a deal, and the title wasn't there. He had put the title in his mother's name, and she died. And I'm thinking, oh my golly, if this is really before the internet got hot. If this car gets in Auto Trader, I'm dead meat. Someone will hop on this like white on rice. And I waited about 3 weeks, and finally he said, I got the title. And I went down, but he said he wanted cash. I said, well, I don't want to haul that much cash around. I said, how about a cashier's check? And he said, well, what's that? I said, it's as good as cash. I don't know if I want to check. I said, go to your bank and tell them what we're going to do. So he took part of it in a cashier's check and part of it in cash. So I had cash in a bank envelope, and I grabbed one of my employees at the filter company, and I said, you're going to go with me to DeLand. You're into cars, and this will be fun. And if I get shot, you will too. So, I didn't know what was going to happen. I'm hauling, 5 figures in cash around. So we did the deal. When he opened the garage, the gentleman who owned the car had gotten grocery bags from the local store, Winn-Dixie or Publix, and he collected tin cans and filled the bags and then piled the bags around the car so when the garage door was open, his neighbor wouldn't see it. So he opens the garage door and he's taking these bags off. And I'm going, This is the Holy Grail of Fords. You can talk about GT40s, you can talk about anything, but this is Mr. Ford's son's car. This is the car built in 1934 at the tri-motor plant of Ford. And I knew what I was looking at. I knew the car well. I had researched it. The first thing you don't want to do is, oh my God, because the price goes, you got to be a little bit blasé about I thought this was going to be a 34 convertible, but it's just hot rod. No, I told him I knew what it was. And I learned a lesson. In 1979, I had just bought the Brabham BT-8 out of the South Carolina junkyard for $2,900. I just bought the Lang Cooper King Cobra for $6,900. So I find a Porsche RS60 Spyder for sale in San Francisco. I just happened to be in San Francisco. And I went to see the car, and it was complete. The body was rough, but it was all complete. It looked like it was full of walnuts, like a bag full of walnuts, but it was all the original aluminum. It had the FIA glass windshield, not the plexiglass windshield, the windshield required when they ran at Sebring or Le Mans. Had the convertible top, which was required by the rules, that would blow off at 15 miles an hour. But it was all there with a fresh motor and running. And the guy wanted $13,500 for it. And I said, yeah, I just paid $6,900 for a Shelby King Cobra and $2,900 for Denny Holmes Brabham. Why on earth would I pay $13,500 for an older, slower car? And so I said, well, I'll offer you $12,500, but not one red cent more. He says, nah, I think I get $13,500 for it, which he did. It was the second place Sebring car. It had history as long as your arm. And today the car is worth probably $5 to $6 million. I learned a lesson. One, if you know the value of something and you have the money, step up to the bar, buy it, get the deal over with, get out of town. And when I saw the Ford, I asked the guy if he'd been offered any money for it, and he said yes. I asked him how much. He told me. I said, this car is worth a lot more than that. He says, I know that. He was testing me. I said, well, what do you want for it? And he gave me a number. I said, I can't afford that, but I can afford this. He says, well, no, I don't want to take that for it. Let's meet in between. So we picked the number in between, and we agreed on about the car. But I wasn't going to let it get away. If I had to borrow money, I would have borrowed money to get it. I sold a car to make it happen. I brought the car home. When I rolled it off the trailer, it hadn't been running. It hadn't run in years. It had seized up. It was a Mercury engine. We pulled it out. I had a brand new flathead Ford in a packing crate that was Army surplus. We just put the motor in, saved the old one. We took it to shows, and I drove. We didn't restore it. We just buffed the paint out. It had been repainted a couple times. It was originally gray, then I think it was black, and then it was red. And whoever painted it was an Earl Scheib paint job. They didn't even pull the upholstery off. It would unsnap paint around it. Just, it looked like a rattle can paint job. But the car got so valuable that we couldn't enjoy it. We sold it in 2009 at Amelia Island. I say reluctantly, but it made a lot of things happen in life. It went to John O'Quinn, who was an attorney who was collecting cars. He had about 900 cars. He was in Houston, Texas, and he died. Unfortunately, he died in a car crash a couple of years later. And then Edsel Ford, who had wanted the car, Ford didn't bid enough at the auction. O'Quinn was going to buy that car one way or the other. Edsel Ford brokered a deal through Rob Myers at RM, and the car is now at it's been restored by RM, and it's at the Edsel and Eleanor Ford estate in, I think it's called Glocker Point in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. So it's in the right home. Ford's used it. When I owned it, they had me bring it out to SEMA. It was featured in the book on 32 Ford hot rods, although it was a 34. It was featured in Automobile Magazine. It was a car that everybody had forgotten. The guy tried to sell it to Ford Motor Company. He got a hold of somebody in the PR department. They said, call the Henry Ford Museum. So they called the museum and said, well, we're not buying anything, but if you want to donate it, we'll give you a $250,000 tax write-off. And the last thing that guy needed was a tax write-off. He wanted the cash. We did a deal considerably less than that for the car. Edsel Ford was about 5'8". So for me to get in the car, I had to take the seat cushion out and sit on the floor. But I described it as a car so good that you'd get surgically altered to drive it. My wife and I would take it out. We'd go for a ride on Sunday afternoon. I drove it down to Daytona for a show one time and drove it back. The problem was, if we went down I-95, people would they'd look at you and they'd steer into you. So we came back US 1 with the bikers. It was a completely usable car, but it was a very, I want to say very, very rare, one of one.
If you love VinWiki, you'll have heard us talk about minimizing ownership cost on exotic cars. But the guys at Exotic Car Hacks have developed a system, an educational resource that you can access now using exoticcarhacks.com/VinWiki and get the best membership rates that they've offered since Black Friday. It shows you how to leverage financing, minimize what you pay, maximize how you sell it, and minimize the cost while you've got it. So be sure to join their community of owners and enthusiasts today at exoticcarhacks.com/VinWiki, and it'll be easier than ever to buy, own, and sell and love the car of your dreams.